I want to, like I said, talk about a number of issues. And the one I want to begin, and when you look at the media, when you look at narratives, the one which comes to mind when you look at, let's say, the last 2 or 3 decades, one of the biggest false narratives in modern India, I would say, was built around 2002. Now, this was an era where social media didn't exist. And even now, even today, 2 decades after, roughly 2 decades after 2002, a lot of people continue to spread information and lies about what really, happened. So I want to understand from you, how do you look at 2002 and the events in 2002 in the state of Gujarat? And can you deconstruct this smear campaign, particularly against Prime Minister Modi ji, for us?
Yeah, so in fact, that's a very interesting question and a very pertinent one in today's time. In fact, when there is so much censorship all around, and we're just hearing about Twitter censoring Donald Trump and blocking him and all that. And we are talking about the time, which is almost 20 years now, 19 years. And as you correctly pointed out, that was a time where there was no social media, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know about Facebook, but certainly Twitter wasn't there. WhatsApp obviously wasn't there. And all our news used to be, and the channels, I think there was only NDTV that used to come through Star News, if I'm not mistaken. Yes. So, and of course, Doordarshan, which was a government, you can say government-owned propaganda site, it still is. But other than that, all our news used to come from newspapers, like the Hindu, Times of India, and all the other, main print, what they call mainstream media. And now looking back, a few things can be said, which is that the amount of misinformation that would have been spread would have been truly phenomenal. Because if there is one thing that has happened in the last, I would say, 7 years, 6 years, if you want to put it as the time from 2014 onwards, it is that people have recognized what are facts and what are opinions, so they can clearly make out. And in fact, if people, they are still able to pardon people who give opinions, because that's your opinion, that can be completely wrong, or it can be right, or it can be structured on facts or not, but it's opinion. And they can differentiate that between, what people give out as facts. But when you're talking about 2002, and I look back, upon if I, seem to remember the kind of articles that were written, they were purely opinionated, with no facts at all. And just imagine there was, an audience would read it, for example, in a newspaper, and other than flinging the newspaper against the wall, you had no option, because there was no Twitter, or any other social media platform for you to give out the facts and to say that, look, what you're saying is completely wrong. So, and that narrative continued for 3 or 4 years. And there are two things here. Number one is that we know how deeply damaging that kind of narrative would have been to the national psyche. Because here we had in 2020, beginning of 2020, in the full glare of 24-hour news channels and social media, you can say pretty matured social media. I mean in a negative as well as positive sense. And yet you had the Delhi riots, as we all saw through them, being declared as a pogrom, as an anti-Muslim pogrom. So right when you have in the social media age something that is being screened and being videographed by everyone on the road, and all the videos are there, that completely exposed this propaganda that was spread, that it is purely an anti-Muslim pogrom. So when you can have that in 2020, can you imagine without the means of 24-hour news channels or non-left media or social media, there would have been no opposition to the propaganda that was spread in 2002. So this is what is glaring, that in one sense, nothing has changed, because if amongst all the social media, platforms and freedom, you can call it, if still there are people, and there are journalists, so-called senior journalists, established journalists, still saying that the riots were and purely an anti-Muslim pogrom, that Hindus weren't affected, that the state orchestrated it, what can you say? You can only correlate it to what was happening before the age of essence. So it is scary in one sense. It is really scary. But we, of course, we lived through that age. And the amazing thing is that now when you look back, of course, you can't remember half the things that were being shown because NDTV, in fact, even Narendra Modi was interviewed by Ms. Madhu Kishwar, and he gave two examples of two journalists who were out to create mayhem just for the heck of it as a propaganda. Other than that, what astonishes me is that still some of the lies that were propagated then, 19, 20 years ago, they still have almost, in a very cynical way, I can put it, stood the test of time. And two of them come to my mind. Other than the fact that, of course, the SIT gave a clean chit to Narendra Modi, and there are people who still don't believe that. They would, when it suits them, they believe the judiciary. When it doesn't suit them, then they don't believe the judiciary. So they would never accept that the Supreme Court has said that Narendra Modi is not culpable for that those riots. Plus, they very conveniently try and overlook the fact that those riots were a reaction to one of the most heinous crimes ever committed in India, which was 54 Hindus who were brutally burnt alive in a coach. So that slowly, and we have seen over the years, NYT, they try, and it's very difficult for them to airbrush it because there was evidence and people knew the truth. But believe me, 50 years ago, they would have airbrushed it. And you can see it as remnants in NYT when they try and slip in these lines that, there was a fire that broke out on the Sabarmati Express, 50 people were killed because a fire broke out, right? Now, 50 years ago, without any, photographs, without any evidence of the victims, this would have been the prevailing thing because that is how propaganda becomes concretized, is crystallized. And that itself is a window to the world, to a scary world where there are people who are just not willing to accept the truth, whatever the truth may be. And so two instances that come to mind is that how Narendra Modi was maligned, and I can think of only two there. I'm sure there are more. One was the fact that people still say that he was castigated by Atal Bihari Vajpayee by saying that Raj Dharma ka palan hona chahiye. Now, the clips are still there. So people can go and see the clips. And despite that, this propaganda spread. So what happened was that Vajpayee and Narendra Modi were sitting side by side, having a press conference. And somebody asked a question, and Atalji said, Raj Dharma ka palan hona chahiye. And then Narendra Modi told Atal Bihari Vajpayee, who was the Prime Minister, wahi to kar rahe hain. And 2 seconds later, Vajpayee said, and this is on record, हाँ वही हो रहा है, मुझे यकीन है, or something like that, वही राजधर्म का पालन ही हो रहा है. Now that is conveniently omitted, and people say that look, Vajpayee castigated Narendra Modi कि राजधर्म का पालन होना चाहिए और वो नहीं हो रहा. The other more blatant lie that is still being spread, and I wrote a piece on this because I caught red-handed the fellow, the senior journalist, I call him Michelangelo, who was spreading this lie even 20 years down the line, that Narendra Modi said every action has an equal and opposite reaction, right? Now, this was kind of tied to, or kind of to cushion the almost barbaric, cruel quote of Rajiv Gandhi saying that, in the aftermath of the anti-Sikh pogrom, that was a genocide, that Rajiv Gandhi said, when a big tree falls, the earth shakes. So people, equated that and said, look, this monster Narendra Modi has said every action has a reaction. So his action, according to him, were the burning alive of 54 Hindus, and the reaction are these riots. Now they, shockingly, they leave out what he said immediately after he said this. And it is amazing how, and that's when you know that they are spreading propaganda, because what he said was that, and I want neither the action nor the reaction. This is what he said. And now that is conveniently left out. So what can you, this is what I say, that you cannot cure these propagandists. You can only expose them. And with the onset of social media now, you can, there are people who expose lies, by the minute. Earlier, they used to take a month. You would see something in the Hindu, and you would, religiously write a letter, dear editor, this is wrong and all that. And 99% chances are they would never be published. So there goes the, you're trying to expose them. Then social media came, but it took time. And now it's kind of, when I say mature, and I really mean it in a negative as well as a positive sense, because in a negative sense, in almost a cynical way, there are fact checkers, but even fact checkers have their ideologies now. When you are checking facts, you must be completely devoid of all propaganda, all allegiances, all ideologies, because it's almost a scientific process. You look at something and you decide whether this is true or this is false. This is black and white. It's not gray. But there are fact checkers who pick and choose, what they need to fact check. And if there is something which is inconvenient, they, skip it out. So now we've reached an age where even fact checking is ideology centric. So I don't know where we're headed, but certainly we are at a much better position than what we were, back then in 2002.
Right.
Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.